So I'll start off and then let people think of their own questions. So I was watching TV, and there's a UPS commercial where the different parts of the company, the marketing, the customer relations, they're all happy, right? Because UPS solved the problem for them, and it was, I think they have a great, brilliant campaign. I'm wondering, when it comes to sort of green chemistry and sustainability, if you think about either a lab or a corporation, et cetera, do all departments think of green chemistry and sustainability as something that services their submission as to keep them happy, or is it sort of kind of a pain? I think anyone that wants to answer, and then we'll go.
I think just as much as they don't want to have to worry about the disposal, they don't want to be around them either. So I think that from the bench as well, they do want a reduction of toxicity and toxic chemicals. But I agree, like in the last presentation, they pointed out how it's got to come from the consumer, that they will be the ones driving the movement forward for green chemistry. If you call for it, then innovation follows.
It's a very interesting question. So sometimes in these policy setting conversations, at least in our company, we feel like the meat in the sandwich. So at the one end, we have our public affairs people saying we're in a leadership position here, and we want to maintain that leadership position, and we need to continue to think about developments that we can make, improvements that we can make in sustainability and ingredient usage and so on. And so there's a real pull from that perspective. And at the other end, there is the supply chain and the research and development functions that definitely want to see and have strategies in this area. But inevitably come the questions about, do you really understand the impact on our supply chain with what you're proposing in terms of changes in ingredient standards? So it's a real tension.
Oh, interesting. Go ahead. We'll go down the line. If you can pass, if you don't feel like you have much to add.
I would echo a lot of what Zephanie's saying. I think it is one of those things that's garnering more interest and attention, right? Stakeholders, no matter where you turn, right? Be it our customers, be it our communities where we operate. As we're looking at graduates coming into our company, they connect with Dow as a major chemical company because of our sustainability programs. But there is a challenge, right? I mean, we largely are a company that has huge assets that are designed to make particular chemicals and even to make kind of minor modifications. When I was talking about one of my examples, it's amazing how expensive that is. So I think people want to do the right thing. They see the driver, but it's a very competitive global environment that we're operating in, and unfortunately not all companies around the globe are setting those standards, setting those stretch targets for themselves. So that's tough.
So it's been my experience that there are very few companies that are that vertically integrated about green chemistry. But having said that, as the others have said, there are a lot of people in various parts of the company who do what they can to implement it. But it isn't, there are many competing demands. So for example, quality, many times people will throw that up as, gee, we can't do this because it may affect the quality or something else. So there are things that compete with it, but I think the general intent in many companies is there, but it's not top to bottom.
All I can add to this discussion is a lot of comments we get from our BizNGO working group on sustainable materials. And safer chemicals. Disclosure is a huge, huge challenge down the supply chain, and we are finding that we could have, at our annual general meeting, which by the way is coming up in December, we often have full ongoing work groups just on how do we handle disclosure, how do we get more disclosure. Seagate, the largest producer of hard drives, has made it their mission to get disclosure through all their tiered supply chains. But without disclosure, you can't make informed decisions. So that's why you're seeing a lot of movement from the NGO community on this issue of disclosure. Yeah,
there's also movement from the UN and
been involved in some of that, and I think it's moving in a good direction. Just backing up to the 1990s when companies in Massachusetts were first doing their toxic use reduction plans, they were required to bring together a group, really what nobody called them, but is a multi-stakeholder group of line workers and purchasing people and spec writers and whoever to do that toxic use reduction planning process. And it took a lot of work to get them together, but it does work and it does help make those decisions. And that's sort of now that we're more in a realm of restricted substances coming down as directives from around the world, now the purchasers and the designers and the salespeople, they're all much more in tune with it. But it has taken a while for that to happen. And I'm still not sure that the bench chemists are quite connected in a way that we would all like.
At this point, I probably don't have a whole lot more to add. I would like to echo Beverly's comments, though. I think that from the consumer perspective, certainly in the construction industry, not only having better tools that take steps towards disclosure or public disclosure, but having those tools such as the green screen that help teams like mine interpret that data and make informed decisions that meet our goals is really just a key component to that whole decision-making process as well.
Just add that not everyone is persistent as you are, Joe, and I think that it would be great if others didn't have to work quite as hard as you had to get that information.
All right, we'll go to the audience. We'll start over there and flip back and forth.
Sure. Jack Spangler, Roundtable member, and thanks all of you for being so generous with your time and coming here today. Really good session. In fact, on Tuesday, I gave an assignment to my Sustainable Buildings course to go do an inventory of products in their house, find the chemicals, find the substitutes. So Beverly, I've already updated that and sent a memo out to them to look at the websites that you shared with us. So we'll be looking forward to those results. My question is to Joe. We had a discussion at breakfast this morning, and so the question I had is, we're trying to move our own university to be more selective in the materials that they choose and specify in our buildings. We couldn't possibly ask them to do the heavy lifting that you did. And this goes to what, Liz, your question right there. And so my question is, we're thinking of an approach that looks at exposures. Now, your last product that you just talked about, if one thought about this, where are the exposures to people in the building? If that's where the highest concentration might be, the uptake might be. And is it necessary to think this through in a more, let's say, the good isn't, the best isn't the enemy of the good, in the sense that we still can do tremendous amount of good for the interior of our buildings by putting in not just hazard, but exposure into the formulation. So that's my question to you. And give me the alternatives. Why isn't that good enough? I'd like to know.
Sure. So that's I'll do my best to give you the alternatives. I don't know if I've got the silver bullet per se. It's an issue that we think about quite a bit when we're selecting materials and we're preferencing the materials that we're using in the building. The green industry has, or the building industry has for a long time looked at what we call finished products, right? That's the flooring material, the paints, the faucets and the handles, and all the things that you interact with as an occupant in the building. And the way that we're typically addressing that, or where we historically have addressed that, is with the VOC stamps or standards. There are a number of great certifications that really help guide that decision-making process. In the case of the Bullet Center, what we're trying to do to address the real human health exposure is to do ongoing indoor air quality testing. And so we've partnered with the University of Washington. We've established baselines in the floors before they're occupied. We're taking tests then. We move furniture in. We come back. We do additional indoor air quality screening, and then kind of on a pretty regular schedule, we're measuring VOC content in the space and trying to make informed decisions about what types of furnitures, what types of finishes were added that might be impacting that air quality in an adverse way. So that's one piece to it. I think what we're really trying to do is transition out of the just getting the stamp or the certification and doing ongoing performance data collection and trying to make our decisions there. The flip side to that is, even this product I showed on my last few slides, the Fast Flash, that's a product that is under a whole lot of insulation and it's behind metal siding, and it would be very unlikely that any human would come in contact with that in its functioning kind of lifespan. But again, if you think back to the first couple slides I showed, the charge that the construction industry is getting right now is we're seeing phthalates in the water, and that's washing off of our cities. We're seeing flame retardants in our watershed, in our marine life. And so there's definitely this bigger ecosystem question that starts to emerge there as well. Unfortunately, I don't know what the next step or the next evolution would be, but I think, you can isolate some of the, by looking at just the human health or just the environmental health, I think that you're obviously preferencing materials that may need to be looked at in a more holistic way. Yeah.
Yes. Next.
Good morning. I'm Jerry Paulson from George Washington University. Thank you all very much. One of the topics that came up yesterday during the regulatory discussions was the same topic that's come up this morning, and that's the issue of access to confidential business information. And some of you dealt with this in response to Jack's question, but I'd like to have a fuller discussion of ideas about ways to provide the transparency that the public and the regulatory agencies want and need, and the security that the manufacturers and other industrial organizations need. What processes will bring about the necessary information sharing while protecting necessary confidentiality? And I'd like to hear the panelists discuss that. Thanks.
Not an easy question to answer, and I don't know if I have a good answer, but maybe some observations. We struggle with that as well. We work with, for example, fragrance houses, where we can't always get the full disclosure that we need, and we have some of the same kinds of challenges that Joseph talked about. And okay, so if you can't tell us the full information, tell us, do you use any of these components? So that even at our level, before we give something to consumers, we struggle with that. The kinds of processes to put in place, I think the easiest thing for us to be able to do is because we trade on proprietary information, right? So there is a commercial element to this, and we need to have healthy businesses to invest in research to improve some of the things that we're talking about. One of the easiest things that we can do in the absence of being able to provide full information to the public is to provide information to regulators through various means, and there are some voluntary systems that we participate in to provide that information about our formulations.
Maybe in addition to those comments, I mean, it is challenging because, again, I think our biggest issue is not sharing information down the value chain, but right, how do you protect the tens of millions of dollars of investment that you have in many of these chemistries? So, we use things like non-disclosure agreements, right? We're working more and more on how do you describe the product family, of the material and provide enough. So you're providing information on the health and environmental profile of that material, but not providing, the exact material in certain cases, or, providing that information to a third party. So that's happening more and more, where the third party gets the exact, detailed information. They conduct their assessment, and then the downstream player, has the assurance that it might not, it doesn't contain a material on a particular red list or deselection list, or they've gone through and done their overall assessment. So, but it's a challenging situation that we all you know, as I mentioned before, one of our premises for strengthening our product safety program is really challenging our businesses to look at ingredient disclosure and really when, you know, sometimes it's you need that protection for a period of time, right? But once the material's out on the marketplace, given the analytical capabilities that exist today, it becomes less critical to maintain that. So that's kind of an element that we're also challenging our businesses on.
So I have a couple thoughts. We've heard from two companies about their in-house processes to basically design out a lot of problems that might come from toxics and lists. So the hole many times is in the small to medium-sized enterprises who don't have those kinds of processes and don't have the tox expertise and so on and so forth to even interpret the information, kind of like what Joseph was saying earlier on. So I think that one way to get to that is to develop processes that are generic and then work with small to medium-sized enterprises to actually implement those processes. The second thing I would think about is third-party certification. So things like the DFE Green Seal and things like that is driving companies to choose from certain lists and they're certified to be, you know, okay. The problem that a formulator has with that list is that it becomes increasingly harder for them to differentiate the product. So that there's a balance there between using all the same things and differentiation of the product, which is going to work against, you know, the desire to use DFE lists and retain confidential business information. So I think it's a combination of process and perhaps third-party certification that the company hasn't, you know, used these materials in the product that they're producing.
It's a really interesting field, this whole issue of disclosure. And it was interesting when Walmart made their announcement on elimination of 15 priority chemicals, although they didn't mention the actual chemicals. They just said 15 chemicals. Part of their policy is, I think it was 2015, that they will make their suppliers put their product ingredient on their websites. So this movement to inform substitution disclosure is really taking off in the retail chains that want to make stand out. But just on the green screen, what we've also seen some movement on is actually people just want to know the template. They want the information to make informed decisions. So in some cases, users are actually redacting their CAS numbers, but presenting the template. I didn't have time to show you what a green screen template would look like, but if you can imagine all those 18 endpoints on one template, you would get the readout. So there's that way you can move forward. But certainly certification, cradle-to-cradle certification, if you have the money to do it. I take your point, though, about SMEs. I mean, they're the ones that are struggling with this whole issue. And one last tool, just for your website collection, a really neat tool that came out this year is called chemhat.org, CHEMHAT, Chemical Hazard Assessment Tool. It was developed by the steelworkers, coming back to the worker exposure issue. It's a great nifty tool that incorporates our green screen list translator from the Pharos database into a much more user-friendly tool. So have fun with that one too.
So I think to add to Connie's point that there's a lot you can do with analytical equipment these days, I think that there's a lot less secrecy these days, even though we may pretend that it exists. There are a lot of ways to find out what something is made of, and there are a lot of concerns with not U.S. companies, but global companies, you know, back engineering things and finding out what's in something. So I'm not sure that there's really as much proprietary information as business would like to think there is. Our companies are finding that actually that making quality products and really working hard to innovate and be on the forefront and their manufacturing processes are what allow them to set themselves apart, and not necessarily the actual molecule at the end.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing that I'd probably add to the conversation so far is it really the either model works pretty well. I mean, I think from the end user's perspective, the model where you have a third-party verifier doing the independent assessment of the product. It's something that is akin to, perhaps Forest Stewardship Council, right? It's an assurance that to the consumer that from beginning to end, from extraction to delivery, a certain threshold of best practices have been met. I think that service would be valued and certainly honored by the consumer, knowing that it had some full disclosure had been passed on to a third-party verifier. I think the push that you're seeing from consumers right now for full disclosure is really tied to the fact that these databases and these filters are really our only tool to make an informed assessment about our product, and we really do rely on those interpretive tools to help us understand what we're looking at. So yeah, I think either pathway, but again, just knowing what is in the product, or at least having assurance that somebody does know what's in the product and can pass that assurance along to us, is ultimately what we need so that we can, in my case, build a building and pass that assurance on to our client or to our community that we're not contributing to this toxicity issue, in our surrounding ecosystem. So that's really what I'm looking for.
I'd like to add a comment also. We're not producers of widgets. We produce knowledge, but we're purchasers of kits and things like that come with a lot of proprietary license to them. And when we talk about third-party verification, the other aspect is that there are a lot of beautiful labels out there and logos out there, and I don't necessarily think that every consumer is educated enough to know eco-design isn't necessarily Green Seal or vice versa, all the greenwashing that's going on. So, the level of education then put upon the consumer now, it becomes tremendous, and I still feel full disclosure needs to be appropriate, or some other.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Certainly add that full disclosure is the way to go. It's from my opinion, but I realize that not everyone's going to agree.
No, and it's a really valid point, right? I mean, there's something, like 300 or 400 independent labels and certifications that the consumer's looking at right now. So certainly for that to be an effective pathway, there needs to be large, kind of industry agreement that there is one gold standard for that particular sector. Yeah, it certainly didn't mean to imply that, that just putting the seal on would somehow solve the problem, because it certainly hasn't done that for us so far. So yeah, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, well, at this rate, we're going to hit our time limit with just the remaining questions, and I have more. So,
mine is specific for one person. So,
okay.
I'm Dennis Devlin, Roundtable member, and this is a question for David. David, you implied that traditional approaches for ingredients and catalysis and engineering are impediments, I think, to step change improvements in sustainability. I wonder if the ACS or the Green Chemistry Institute has a view on the impact of nanotechnology and nanoscale materials, and whether that's going to provide that step change for sustainability, or will we be replacing one set of problems with another?
So I think nano has a place, but it's just, not the big issue. When I'm speaking of things like platinum group metals or things like that, it really is based in a life cycle perspective of how long things will last and at what cost, both economic, social, and environmental, will we need to extract these materials from the Earth's crust. So we're rapidly getting to a point of use and distribution in products and in the earth that there isn't enough to continue on at the rate that we are. And that's really what I'm talking about. And in the process of mining many of those things, we release into the environment a great deal of very toxic materials, from heavy metals to acids to bases to you name it.
Yeah, I was thinking beyond catalysis. For example, coatings. We use many coatings. Coatings, now there's dry coatings, no solvents, no water.
Right.
To me, that would imply a step improvement in sustainability. However, there are other health considerations with nanomaterials, obviously, functionalities, distribution in the body, and we're wrestling with that issue. the balance. And we're looking at this new technology, and there's still a lot of questions, and I was just wondering if ACS had a view, but.
The ACS doesn't officially have a view, no. I mean, it has positions on things like nanotech, and, it certainly is something that they feel has a place and a role, and it's going to continue to grow.
Switch up, go to Marin.
Hi, Kenneth Nolan, Roundtable member. I have a question for Joe and then a more general question for the panel, though I don't expect everybody to respond to it. Joe, that was very brave of you to pick up the phone and start cold calling like that. But what do you do when the supplier is in China, is my first question. And then a more general question. There are already difficulties in disclosure, but with increased globalization and sourcing of ingredients or components and so on, what mechanisms or tools are there to facilitate, if you like, the transfer from one country to the next of this type of information?
Certainly, the sourcing of international material was a tricky one. Generally speaking, the particular building standard that we were pursuing is structured in a way where, for the vast majority of the products, they were all sourced within about 1,000 kilometers of Seattle. Some of the lighter materials we could source domestically or on the continent. So really, there were very few instances where we had to go to an international source for a material in the building. And in all of those cases, there was, obviously a partner stateside that was able to at least convey the information and get information and whatever disclosure material was available from those suppliers. But as I'm thinking through it, perhaps maybe a sealant or an adhesive or two, but really all of the heavy materials that we were procuring came from a regional supplier.
Okay, I guess there is no answer.
I would say that there aren't any good mechanisms, really. I mean, specifically in the supply chains into places like India and China, it's very difficult to get good information about what is in the chemical formulation.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe I would just say one of the things that we're doing as a multinational company is working to strengthen industry associations that exist in some of those places to try to help, share with them best practices, leverage approaches, and those kinds of things. But, it is a challenge.
I just have to add a PS. When we had again, on this issue of disclosure, particularly with the apparel sector, where they've been hammered recently by a big international Greenpeace campaign, the detox campaign. And then you see this commitment of major brands to zero discharge of hazardous chemicals in use by 2020. They've had to set up this whole sort of investigation of multi-tier supply chains and how do you get the information, how do you trust it? When we were having sort of a back and forth discussion, New Balance said, and that's why we manufacture in the U.S., and that's why we source in the U.S. So I'm wondering if one of the impacts of this is you're going to see more relocation back locally, to take your point. It might be interesting to watch this.
Linda McCauley, Roundtable member. Just a comment about disclosure and public information. I think we need different levels of disclosure. If we look at what the public knows about food safety now, some of us want all the details. Some of us only want to know if certain things aren't in there. And other people just want to grade. They want to grade on an app on their iPhone if they're at a fast food restaurant, what's the healthiest thing on the menu. So I think it's very complex, but I think to help us change regulation, the public's got to be on our side, and if we don't come up with effective ways to inform the public about this problem, we're doomed with changing the regulation, because I really do believe the public think that they're protected. The majority of public think they're protected. And I just have a quick question for Connie on your circle diagram around sustainability. I was glad to see that you had protection of health and environment. It said protection of local health and environment. So can you explain to me why Dow would use local versus global?
Well, it's interesting. It's been an evolution. So I mentioned in 95, we started our first sustainability goals, 2005 goals, and then we evolved to 2015. And now we're actually looking, what do we do beyond 2015? For 2005 goals, it was very globally focused, but we realized that, and we made significant strides in terms of reducing emission, reducing waste generation, those kinds of things. But we realized that there were particular differences depending upon maybe where a facility was sited in a community. So there were different potential challenges and issues that needed to be addressed. And so that's why as we put forward 2015 goals, we allowed, I mean, we do some things globally, but we allowed the local areas to identify those issues that might be most relevant to their local communities, things they cared most about.
Interesting.
You're on.
I'm Jonathan Hers with Department of Health and Human Services. I wanted to connect some of the points that people made in answer to one of the questions were asked earlier about how do you worry about the exposure depending on if it's away from the people inhabitants of the building. Well, I think it misses I think the question in a way misses the point. It's why LEED is changing, because previously you had to air out the building before the tenants arrived. It didn't really matter what the workers were exposed to or what the manufacturers, the people, getting the raw materials. So I think the whole point is you can't consider any of this without considering the entire life cycle. So that's a point. I have a question though. I'm kind of amazed by the idea of green screen, and I'm wondering, does it really matter if people know what's in the ingredient? Joe was saying it took a while to figure out that this long name was phthalates, which we all know are bad. Does it really matter if you can have a system that says, that asks, do you have anything in this product that is level 3 or above? Because I think that it would do two things. One would be if it's from a credible organization, peer reviewed and all that, you don't have to worry about greenwash. The other one is that list would be constantly changing. The materials would be moving up, or presumably they'd be moving up from what I've heard from the other presentations. But it would make things much simpler because you wouldn't have to know what down the supply chain, proprietary things like that. And at some point, I think you can count on competitors saying, you know what, I tested their product, they're lying. So at some level with a system like that, is that something that we could seriously pursue?
You should have Helen Holder from HP answer that question. They found it was an efficacious way to put what they wanted as opposed to a restricted substances list. And my fear of RSLs, as we all understand, is that it might not be on a list, but it doesn't mean it's safer. So I really like anything that can advance a criteria-based approach on safer substitution. And for their uses, they find that it's working as a procurement guideline, building it into their procurement specs. Benchmark 2 or higher. And what they're now seeing is competition to make within the supply chain that we have a benchmark 3. So I think that's why people are picking up this method, because it's quite handy in procurement. So we'll see how it rolls out. Part of the problem of having everything up on your website and for free and easily downloadable is we're not that good at tracking who's using it. So it's sort of word of mouth at this point. And I'm hearing it referenced in places that I never expected. So hopefully you'll see more procurement building it in.
Okay, we have a few minutes and a few questions, so hopefully we can get through them all.
Just add a really quick postscript to that, which is that in addition to the chemical-to-chemical substitution, I think it's really important for someone like California's doing and others to really step back and think about the product and whether that material is necessary at all, maybe completely different ways to engineer your building and to provide the same service without the chemicals. So I think there's also a bigger picture piece that goes along with that.
So my question's to Zephanie. I was intrigued by your product evaluation where you, I think it was step number 4, where you go and try to find unintended uses of your products in consumers. And then I started thinking of how complex this might be. And I just want to share with you, first of all, I'd like to hear more about that, but I'd like to share some recent advances that are, I think, might have implications to this. One is dermal uptake and the work going on looking at squalene on our oils of our skin being a favorable partitioning of semi-volatiles. So things that are in the air, in the products now, and if you start changing that layer by additional products you might put on a baby's skin, this might be changing the partitioning factor in a pathway. But the Sloan Foundation has 2 interesting new initiatives out. One is the human biome, and the other is indoor chemistry. So the complexity of our indoor environments interacting with products or products changing skin human biome populations is something that I think we have to keep an eye on. I don't know where it's going to go, but I think we have to keep an eye on this issue.
On? Yes, I'm on. Yeah, so the in-use testing step of our safety assurance process is really kind of fundamental in that that's the connection between the laboratory and the in-home use, and we're really putting the product without much guidance, any guidance really, in the hands of a panel of consumers that we have around the world, and asking them to use the products and tell us about how they use the products. And that's not led in any way, so that we can just truly understand if they can understand what's on the label, they can use it as it's intended, and in that way validate our safety assessments based on what's in the product and our anticipated use of the product. So that's really what that step is about. I take your point on some of the emerging science as well, and at least I can say that we're certainly looking at the microbiome. We have a serious internal effort looking at that in terms of managing certain conditions, but also understanding how products interact with that.
I think we're going to take these last 2, but we have to be quick, so please.
Actually, I got 2 questions. The first one for Trisha. I think what your lab do is really good. So how many labs in US doing such jobs? And do you plan to publish some guidelines for other labs to follow the protocol for the lab sustainability and the green chemistry?
Thank you. We do publish a sustainability report, which has all of these items in it. It's biannual, it's not annual. We have over 400 labs that are working on these projects. Recently, what I got was the sandwich effect. I've got senior leadership on board, and I've got the grassroots laboratory staff on board, and I just gotta get to the meat of it and get those groups on, and then follow through. So certainly, I think it's in a lot of cases it's a no-brainer for everyone. I don't think they see it as a challenge. It's just one more process for them to go through. But obviously, they would like to have reduced toxicity, reduced waste, and better environment for everyone.
Good to hear that. And the other question is for Zephanie. I really love to hear that industry remove formaldehyde not by force but by themselves. So can you tell me what's the driving force for the company to make the decision and to replace formaldehyde in this process? Is there any cost going to be increased? And would you expect profit for the company for the long run?
There were 3 elements to the question. Remind me of the first one. Was
the driving force for the company. Cost and the profit.
And the profitability. So the driving force was really a changing landscape. You know, we recognized a while back that it's not enough for us to be compliant with regulations and follow the science. We also needed to understand consumer sentiment about the ingredients that we were using, and that the combination of those three really were the driving force, and recognising also that in order to fulfil this ambition to have trusted, enduring, thriving brands, that part of the trust equation is providing greater transparency to what we already do. So there was that. The cost is phenomenal. But we understood that it was the necessary and right thing to do, so it has become the priority effort within the organisation. And profitability, we're not really looking at that. It's more about the enduring trusted brands.
Thank you.
Last.
Denny Dobbin, Society for Occupational Environmental Health. And Stephanie, I still buy Johnson & Johnson. I still trust you guys and your products. So I want to congratulate the panel for your innovation that you've demonstrated here, and also to thank you for those that specifically included worker health and safety as part of your paradigms. And for Joe, just a comment is that when the building comes down or is being renovated, that surfacing is going to be a problem if it were so. I think that's the way to think about that. And probably about the people that are applying it, so the construction workers that are building it, which often get left out of the equation. And our own work with the leads and trying to get that built in to the construction side. My specific question is to Liz, and could you say a little bit more about the cost effectiveness of Turi? Clearly it's survived and thrived, but it's a very interesting model. It's been around for what, 20 years now. And it must have some confidence within the community in Massachusetts, and it must be working. And how much money are you saving?
We haven't tried to figure that out in a while. At one point, we figured that it was saving somewhere around $77 million. That was like for the first 8 or 9 years of the program. Companies do save money because, in fact, they don't have to make any changes if they're not going to save money. You know, we don't mandate that they do anything. We only mandate that they plan. So they are saving money, and they are reducing their use of toxic chemicals. We've had different points of where we're measuring from, but it's somewhere on the order of probably 60 to 70% in waste byproduct reduction, and somewhere in the order of 40% use reduction, and that accounts for changes in production, increases and decreases in production. So they have accomplished their goal, and some companies are finding less of a benefit from their every 2-year toxic use reduction plan. So in 2006, we updated the program so that they can now do resource conservation, take those same tools that they learned and that process they learned and apply it to water and energy and materials that are found in solid waste or covered toxics that aren't covered. And they can do that every other planning cycle. And so that gives them more benefit, and they save tons of money in the energy conservation and a lot of money in water conservation. So there's still more good places to look.
Well, please join me in thanking the panel. 11:30? We'll be back at 11:30. I cheated you out of 6 minutes of a break, but